Welcome back to another episode of The Road Chose Me. My name's Dan Grech, and today let's get into all the decisions you need to make to select a vehicle to drive the Pan American Highway. So if you've ever dreamed of driving all the way from Alaska to Argentina, all through Central America, all through South America, you're probably wondering what's a good vehicle choice? What kinds of things are mandatory? What kinds of things are optional? How do you go about selecting a vehicle? If that's something you've wondered about, if that's a dream trip for you, stick around, I'll get into all the details right now. So the first thing you need to consider about a vehicle is whether or not it's four-wheel drive or if it's just a two-wheel drive vehicle. And I think tons of people who've never done the drive, they just immediately say you have to have four-wheel drive. But I can tell you from experience, that's not true at all. You definitely do not need a four-wheel drive vehicle. So tons of people have driven down in two-wheel drive Sprinter vans, those Astros. I met a guy driving down in a VW Jetta. It's no problem at all to do it in a two-wheel drive vehicle. So don't think that you have to have four-wheel drive. Even if you want to drive across the salt flats of Bolivia, people do that every year in two-wheel drive vehicles. You really can go and have this amazing trip. And from my experience, I tried as hard as I could to stay off the actual Pan American Highway. I was on gravel roads nearly every day. I was trying to get as remote as I could. And even then, I really only used four-wheel drive in my Jeep maybe once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks. And that was kind of only when I was trying really hard to get off the road and find somewhere to camp or something like that. So even when I was trying to get remote, four-wheel drive, it wasn't actually mandatory. So before you rule out all of those non-four-wheel drive vehicles, remember that you really can do it. And yes, it'll change your trip a little bit. Maybe you won't be able to drive the salt flats if it's the rainy season, although you might not want to anyway because of all the salt you're going to get on your vehicle. But you need to weigh up how much four-wheel driving genuinely do you want to do versus how much exploring rough, bumpy back roads do you want so that you can get to remote and beautiful places. And if that's your goal, you certainly don't need four-wheel drive. On that though, while four-wheel drive isn't mandatory, one thing that you really should focus on is ground clearance. So there are those topes, those homemade speed bumps all across Mexico and elsewhere too. Even paved roads, they can be really broken and cracked. They can be badly deteriorated. And if you are out exploring remotely, there are going to be bad gravel roads, muddy sections, whatever. All of those, you really want more ground clearance. So if I was going to take a two-wheel drive Sprinter van or something like that, I would put a good set of all-terrain tires on it and I would try to raise the suspension an inch, maybe 2 inches, and then that would be amazing for the Pan American Highway. Give yourself that little bit of extra clearance so you can be sure to get over those speed bumps. You can be sure that the broken and cracked pavement, it isn't going to cause a clearance issue. So for me, clearance is a priority. Four-wheel drive, it's kind of a want or maybe a nice to have, but it definitely isn't a must. The next thing that a lot of people worry about is gas or diesel for your vehicle. And again, there's a lot of myths from back in the day where diesel supposedly was more available, but I can tell you from experience, tons of people are driving the Pan American Highway with gas vehicles and they're having no problem at all buying gas. And in fact, even modern vehicles like mine, they'll burn pretty much any gas that you put in them. Whereas, be careful here, if you have a very modern diesel, newer than about 2007 or 2009, your vehicle needs ultra low sulfur diesel. And that doesn't exist in a lot of countries, or it's very hard to find in a lot of countries. And it's going to depend quite a bit on exactly what engine you have, exactly what diesel particulate filter it has, all of these kinds of combinations. But I certainly met people in South America, the computer on their diesel engine had completely shut down and refused to run because the diesel was just too dirty. It has too much sulfur in it and it will cause permanent engine damage. And the situation changes every single year. More and more countries do have ultra low sulfur diesel. So you probably can make the trip work. You definitely want a very high quality diesel filter in line. You definitely want a water separator on your diesel. And you're going to add those in addition to whatever the factory has. So be careful. Old diesel, yes, really good choice. Any gasoline engine, yes, really good choice. Brand new modern diesel engine, be very, very careful. You may wind up in a lot of trouble, especially if you're trying to get remote and you're trying to explore those really out of the way places in Bolivia or less developed countries. The next thing that I really think people need to consider is, where are you going to sleep while you're on this adventure? Now, obviously, if you're thinking you'll just stay in Airbnbs or little hotels or whatever like that along the way, clearly you don't need your vehicle for sleeping, so it doesn't actually matter what vehicle you take. From a VW Jetta to a Jeep Wrangler, all the way up to a big Unimog, really, it doesn't matter because you're just going to be sleeping in paid buildings anyway. But for most of us, we really want to be camping, partly to save money, partly because it's the adventure and we want to be out remote. So my advice to you is to sit down with whoever you're going with, whether it's your partner, your family, or even a convoy of other vehicles, and really discuss, where are we going to sleep every single night? Because even if you do this trip really quickly, if you rush, it'll take you 4 to 6 months. So that's 4 to 6 months of your life where you have to sleep every single night. You want to be comfortable, you want to be warm, you want to be dry. Have a think about it. It's going to impact your trip greatly. And so that being said, if you want to sleep in a rooftop tent, which is perfectly workable and lots of people do it, then you'll need a vehicle that can support a big roof rack and a big rooftop tent. So that maybe rules out your little VW Jetta. You know, that's how you can start limiting or chopping off vehicles. If you want to sleep inside your vehicle, obviously too, vans start to look really appealing. Traditional four-wheel drives start to look a little less appealing. You're going to be more cramped if you try to sleep inside this thing. Obviously, if you go with a ground tent, vehicle choice matters even less. And yes, I slept in a ground tent for the whole Pan American Highway. You really can do it, no problem at all. But again, this is how you should start thinking about which vehicle is right for you. Where are you going to sleep? And if you want an integrated pop-up roof like I have, which has been fantastic, again, this really chops out your vehicle options. As far as I know, nobody makes this for a 100 series Land Cruiser. You can't have this exact setup on a Toyota Tundra. So immediately you could start chopping those off the list and say, oh, actually, I want a pickup truck with a slide-in camper, also a very valid option. Then that immediately you can rule out all things like a Jeep Wrangler or a VW Jetta. So think more about where you're going to sleep and how you're going to camp. Prioritize that instead of what's the badge on the front, or, you know, which type of vehicle, whether it's an SUV or whether it's a pickup truck. So hopefully you're starting to get an idea, or you're leaning in a direction of a certain type of vehicle that can work for you. And the reality is, really any vehicle will work. I'm sure it has been driven in any vehicle that we can think of. But what I like to prioritize is what's going to be enjoyable. What's going to actually make you say, I really loved that trip, instead of saying it was really painful, the ride was bone jarring, I was exhausted, so on and so forth. So when I think about an enjoyable trip, there's a few vehicles that I think are not appropriate and that are not good choices. And the first one there is like a big fifth wheel camper. You know, and these are really popular in the USA. These things are ginormous. Can it be done? Yes. Have people done it? Yes, I'm sure they have. But I'm sure if you talk to them, they'll tell you it was very stressful driving such a large vehicle on the narrow South American streets. They'll tell you it was very expensive and difficult to ship from Panama to Colombia, because you have to ship, there's no other way around. They're going to tell you they used an enormous amount of gas and diesel, which is your biggest expense, so it's very much going to define how expensive your whole trip is. So while the fifth wheel is a possibility, I personally think it's not a good choice, and you're not going to enjoy your trip if you do that option. Similar story for a really big motorhome. I think in the US, these things are called Class A for whatever reason. You know, these are essentially as big as a school bus. Again, have people done it? Yes, I'm sure they have. But, you know, if you just want to stick to the main paved highway right down the middle, the Pan American, yeah, maybe this will work okay and you'll get it done. But let's be honest, when you're in Peru, you really want to go up and explore those amazing mountains and lakes. those things are on really narrow, windy, bumpy roads. Do you want to be driving an enormous motorhome on those kinds of roads? I certainly don't think it would be enjoyable. So for me, in the type of trip that I want to do, I want a vehicle that is a bit more nimble than a mega motorhome. And my vehicle is not the world's most nimble, so I'm not saying drive, a little race car. I'm saying choose a vehicle that will help you have the experiences and the kind of trip that you're looking to have. And given the amount of stress and the amount of expense involved in a mega motorhome or a fifth wheel camper, I just don't think they're very good chances. And there's a reason that very, very few people do it. Another consideration that I think is really important, and I know Americans don't consider this so much, is gas mileage. And in the US, gas and diesel, they're really cheap compared to the rest of the world. So tons of people drive big V8s. They don't really care if they get 15 miles a gallon or maybe even 12 miles a gallon. But what you have to remember, if you drive from Alaska to Argentina, you're going to drive 30 or 40,000 miles. So if you do the math, the difference between 12 miles a gallon and 20 miles a gallon, that adds up to a lot of money. And again, I don't know about you, but I'm limited by budget. And so if I run out of money, the trip is over. So do I want to spend 10 years trying to save up enough money so that I can drive a vehicle that gets 12 miles a gallon? Or do I just want to spend 5 years and then drive a vehicle that gets 20 miles a gallon and actually be able to go on the trip sooner or maybe even have a longer trip? I certainly know which one I want. So that's why when I'm thinking about vehicles, someone always says to me, what do you think about the Tundra? I say the Tundra is enormous and it drinks gas. So for that reason alone, I just simply would never have a Tundra. Is a pickup truck an option? Yeah, I think a Tacoma with the V6, or I think even the little Ford Ranger can get good mileage. Those kinds of vehicles, yeah, they're interesting. But a big vehicle that just drinks gas or diesel, I just am not going to do it. And so for me, when I'm thinking about a long expedition like the Pan American Highway, fuel mileage is a really big consideration. And then finally, I know you all want me to talk about exact brands or models of vehicle that I think are a good choice. And instead of going with just my personal opinion, let's look at what lots of people have driven over the years. And there's no doubt about it, tons of people have driven Toyota 4Runners down the Pan American Highway. Even the first generation with the 22 RE 4-cylinder engine, I think is an excellent, excellent choice. All the way up to quite modern 4Runners, they work really well. 80 series Toyota Land Cruisers, 100 series. And now lots of people are driving Tacomas, they're driving pickup trucks with slide-in campers. The Ford F-150, it's too big for my uses and my personal opinion, but people certainly are starting to use it on expeditions. Tons and tons of people drive vans down the Pan American Highway. So everything from those GMC older campers, VW Westphalias of all vintages. And now, of course, Sprinter vans are really popular and tons of people are driving Sprinter vans. And these are great because you can fit your stand-up paddleboard, you can maybe fit mountain bikes in there, you can have a house on wheels, much more, than my vehicles have ever been. So vans are also a really popular choice. Then, of course, there are traditional four-wheel drives. The Jeep Wrangler, it's not the most common expedition vehicle, but more and more people are starting to do it. There's, of course, things like Land Rover Defenders. There's the newer Land Rover Discoveries. There's all kinds of options like that. And the reality is that, yes, all of them will work. They absolutely can go the distance. Some of them might be really good for parts availability in Central America, and then not so good in South America. Some of them might be vice versa. I think, in honesty, there is no vehicle that just has parts availability everywhere. There's no such thing. Even the 70 series Toyota Land Cruiser, it's hard to get parts in some South American countries because they never had them there. So it's always going to be sort of pluses in one category, minuses in the other. So don't focus so much on the precise vehicle. Focus more on what kind of trip do I want to have? What adventures am I looking forward to? And if you've already got a vehicle that enables those adventures, that's the vehicle you should take, no doubt about it. So I hope that information's been helpful, and I hope that once again, it gets you thinking about and realizing You don't have to just stick with whatever the big magazines say or the big overbuilt vehicle you see at the Overland shows. And again, the badge on the front of the vehicle is not going to have much impact on the happiness of your trip. Where you sleep, where you cook, and where you hang out when the bugs are bad or when it's raining, they are going to have a much bigger impact. So don't focus on the brand wars. Don't worry whether you drive a Jeep or a Toyota or a Land Rover. That doesn't actually make for a happy, successful trip. What matters is the kind of trip you want to have and whether your vehicle enables that. That's what you really need to think about. So don't start down the path and say, I'm going to start with a Toyota and then try to make it work for you. Think about, where am I going to sleep? What vehicle will allow that kind of sleeping, and go from there. So if that video has been helpful, please do hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel. New videos come out every Monday and Thursday. And as well as the videos I'm making here, over on Patreon, and all these people are supporting me there, they're getting behind the scenes access to my upcoming expedition. It's not long at all until I leave, and so they're getting details about the solar and electrical setup that I'm building, the special kitchen that I've got on order, all the details on the actual vehicle, the four-wheel drive setup, the living setups, the drinking water and filtration system I'll be designing and building. All of those kinds of details, they're on Patreon right now. And I'm not just posting about what I'm doing, but I'm really going into the whys and how I'm DIYing stuff, how I'm keeping it all on a budget so that I can have more money for gas in the tank and have a bigger and longer expedition. So that's all over on Patreon. There's a link down in the description. You can head over there right now and have a look at everything. So once again, thanks very much for watching. Stay safe out there, and maybe I'll bump into you on the road.